Hello everyone, welcome to the comprehensive guide to Guan Yu. Now this is going to be a continuation of Anisu's request to cover supports. I've covered Sylvanas, which was the kind of top of Anisu's list. I wanted to cover a warrior support next because I really want to talk about sort of the differences here, especially compared to Sylvanas, and my favorite warrior support is Guan Yu. Now, Guan Yu is terribly interesting because he actually has a lot of abilities that have really nice bonus effects on his abilities that really help out your allies. Now, Painless here is just every time damage happens to or from Guan Yu, you get a stack of Painless. There's 20 stacks. You know, these aren't necessarily the biggest deal. You tend to get these just all over the place, in all honesty. They just happen. I'm going to actually cover the abilities themselves. Just understand that the passive is giving them a boost. I will mention that. Now, Conviction is probably the most interesting because I have gone on record to say, and I will continue to say until they finally give it some scaling, Conviction is the weakest damn heal in the game. Hands down. Even the boosted heal is absolute hot garbage. Okay, you don't use this for in-battle healing to save lives. You just don't. It's not really used for that. There are things I use Conviction for now. Certain items do make this relatively effective, potentially. Okay, there are things you can do with this, but you're very rarely using this for the heal itself. Okay? The most interesting thing is reducing your cooldowns by 2 seconds by healing a friendly god. This is actually one of the big reasons why I prefer him in the support role. In the solo lane, which is where you theoretically are supposed to kind of shove warriors into, he doesn't have anyone to heal that consistently. Every once in a blue moon, the jungler might come in and you heal them for a brief cooldown reduction, but it's not nearly as consistent as being a support where you're always in lane with either the ADC or with the mid lane. So you can actually really break Conviction when you're playing support where you can't really do much of anything at all with this if you're in the solo lane. In fact, a lot of the times when I'm playing Guan Yu in the solo lane, I don't even level this up. I'm focusing on Taolu Assault and Fearless, I think it's called. Warrior's Will, excuse me. So, Warrior's Will, just to move on to this kind of clean segue, hitting enemy gods lowers your cooldowns by 2 seconds. You usually want to use this after you'll use Taolu Assault, but sometimes I use this for the initiation. Now, just like with Conviction and the heal from Conviction being boosted slightly and that not really mattering, Warrior's Will slow either way, it just slows more if you have these stacks of Painless, which really doesn't make a big difference. Again, it's not really that big of a deal. It's a 2-second slow, whether it's 20 or 40%, honestly doesn't make a big difference to me. You are generally using this for its cooldown. It does some pretty good damage. It has decent scaling at 60% as well, so that's something to keep in mind. Not that I particularly care with the way I build him, but we'll get into that. My favorite ability, and the standout here, is Taolu Assault, which reduces enemies' protections, right? It actually, well, okay, I say reduces, it actually gives them to you, alright? And you'll also notice that this has pretty low scaling. Again, not really a huge deal, but this is by far his best ability. Steal those protections away, and even if you, again, don't have the stacks of, what is this, Fearless? I can't ever remember, Painless. Even if you have the full stacks of Painless, it's not a huge difference in stolen protections. You can actually see where, depending on what rank it is, you're only stealing anywhere from 3 to 15 more protections, which 15 can be really substantial in the early to mid game, possibly, and even on certain enemies it makes a big difference in the late game. For example, the enemy mage or the enemy ADC tend to really be concerned when they lose 15 extra protections. That can really hurt them, but by and large it's not really that big of a difference. But the ability to steal protections in general is really powerful. And of course, I'm talking about all these abilities, and you're probably wondering, well, Professor, where's the support? Well, look at it. Besides being able to get cooldowns, reduced by healing your ally, and while this is a really shit heal, it doesn't change the fact that this, as a heal, is still a heal. You're basically providing your ally with free sustain, right? As long as you have something like Sentinel's Gift with Guan Yu, you can basically use Conviction to keep you alive indefinitely because you're getting that mana, theoretically, from the assists from Sentinel's Gift, right? And if you build something that gives you MP5 early on, which depending on the enemy team comp may or may not be easy to do, then you've got it absolutely made, right? Absolutely fantastic use of that there. So even though it's a terrible heal, because it's also reducing your cooldowns, and because you can also reduce Conviction's cooldowns by using Warrior's Will and vice versa, you can really chain together an unholy series of abilities using the combination of Warrior's Will and Conviction and really bring Taolu Assault's cooldowns down as well by quite a substantial amount. Taolu Assault, furthermore, really helps clear waves, especially for your allies, because this also does take away protections from minions. It doesn't give you those protections because it's on enemy god, but you do reduce those protections from minions. It gives them the stun hit. Well, let me rephrase that. It used to take away protections from minions. I believe it still does. Don't necessarily quote me on that. But it used to, and I'm like I said, I'm pretty sure it still does. It's the only thing about Guan Yu I'm uncertain about. Either way, it has a very similar effect to Ares Flame, where you're using Ares Flame and you're knocking the minions into a kind of chain stun state. Taolu Assault does the same thing. And after one or two hits, depending on how the enemy wave is positioned, you can actually basically stun lock the entirety of the enemy wave. It's a really fantastic ability for that. And of course, again, it is reducing enemy gods' protections at minimum. I believe also the minions. This provides your allies with a slow, and then you have Cavalry Charge, which provides a stun. Right? Now, this is a damage escalation of 20% per hit with a really low power scaling. Again, Guan Yu's power scaling is absurdly low overall, with the exception of Warrior's Will. And again, this is still going to do a slow and a stun, even without the stacks of Painless. It just is a slightly better slow and a slightly better stun. Always a really effective ability. Do some damage, end up with a really nice stun, or end it early for a stun when you really need to. I tend to try to use this for as long as possible because I am racking up some pretty impressive damage if you can maintain that for long enough. But it's still nevertheless a very potent item indeed, and one of ability indeed. But talking about how I build him, that's a whole conversation. Actually, I think I build this more often, to be completely honest. And I forgot to include this. Actually, I use that whole tree fairly consistently, to be completely honest. So, Guan Yu is terribly interesting to build for me, because I build him very defensively. Alright, this is partially because I'm a support main, and partially because, again, going back to Guan Yu's scaling, his scaling is pretty low. 20% on Taolu Assault, 30% on his Cavalry Charge ult. Conviction has 0 scaling at all. It's a useless flat heal. Well, I won't say useless, it's not quite useless, but it's a weak flat heal. It should scale 5%, but that's my continued griping since the beginning of me ever playing Guan Yu. Anyways, back to the point, I'm digressing here. The only real substantial scaling is on his second ability there, the dash. And even then, it's only 60%, which isn't bad, but it's also nothing to write home about either. So you can actually pretty effectively forego a lot of power on Guan Yu and not really have it drastically affect your damage output, in all honesty. There are also some other really interesting things that you can use to take advantage of. Primarily Taolu Assault, which is a really fascinating ability to work with, but also Conviction. As weak a heal as that is, the fact that it is a heal in today's meta really gives you some interesting options. Now, when I play Guan Yu, a lot of the time, if I'm playing solo lane Guan Yu, I'm building Warrior's Axe, because, later on in the game, Sundering Axe, damaging an enemy god, deals 2% plus 2% of your protection from items at their current health. I'm already stacking up a lot of, really great protections anyways, so this just kind of fits in with that theme. It also gives you mana in the early game with the Warrior's Axe. You steal 20 mana away, if you are the type of Guan Yu that likes to build and likes to put 1 point into conviction when you're in the solo lane, that can really help you there. But generally speaking, since I only build the 2 abilities, as low as that 20 mana every 10 seconds sounds, since I'm only using 2 abilities pretty consistently anyways, that's often enough for me, where that little mana alone is just fine. But usually, again, I prefer playing him in the support role, where I'll usually build Sentinel's Gift. Again, this is primarily to pick up that mana benefit here, so I can consistently heal my ally, really help them sustain in lane longer. It makes a surprising difference, because the longer your ally is in lane, the longer your ADC or mid is in lane, the more farming they can do, and the more and more they'll pull ahead. I talked about this with Sylvanas in the Comprehensive Guide to Sylvanas Support in Conquest, or at least episode 2 of that series. You can see how substantially different your level can be if you can just sustain in lane, and Guan Yu can provide this a bit more easily to allies using Sentinel's Gift, just as Sylvanas can even without Sentinel's Gift. And it can be very powerful indeed, but it's basically a continuation of that idea, but Sentinel's Gift gives you the actual mana you need to carry that off as a support. Furthermore, the Sentinel's Embrace works really well with Gladiator's Shield, which I build on Guan Yu. I don't care what role I'm playing with him. Gladiator's Shield is somewhere in my build, because it just is such insane amounts of damage. 30% of your protections from items and abilities, which means Taolu Assault is in fact giving you boosted damage. Now, obviously it's not that much, 30% of 70. With the Fearless one, I'm actually going to assume the non-painless version, right? You steal 10 protections per hit from Taolu Assault. Let me actually show you this really quick. You are stealing, with Taolu Assault, without the boost, 30 total protections. Max 3 stacks, 10 protections per stack. That's 30. Both protections, though, are going down, magic and physical. So you're actually stealing a total of 60, right? So, you've got yourself 30% of that 60, and you're talking about 18 extra damage. Now, that doesn't sound like a whole lot, right? Oh, Professor, it's only 18 damage. What's the difference? That is literally more than double. That is basically more than doubling that damage on Gladiator's Shield right there. That doesn't even include the other protections from your items besides themselves. So Taolu Assault itself is basically doubling the base damage of Gladiator's Shield here. You're doing 23 base plus 30% of your other protections besides, right? Not a bad amount. So you've got that really going for you, and this is also one of the reasons why I really like Warrior's Axe going into Sundering Axe, because that's 60 total protections. That's another 18 damage right there by itself. And Sentinel's Gift, again, we're talking Sentinel's Embrace a lot of the time. You might go Sentinel's Boon. By this point, I typically have some other item that gives me MP5. I'll talk about those. I usually go Sentinel's Embrace because it is going to give me those extra boosts to my protections. It's going to boost my allies' protections, and as weak as Guan Yu's heal is, that heal can still have an impact if your allies have much higher protections than they normally would, and the enemy didn't build the proper amount of penetration. That can make quite a difference. I've saved a lot of lives like that, because right now, in this current meta, not a whole lot of people are building penetration. In fact, pretty much only ADCs are consistently building large amounts of penetration. Mages are rarely building more than 20% pen. They'll splash in a couple of items, usually 1 or 2 items that have some flat pen. Guardians rarely ever build penetration. Supports rarely ever build penetration. Assassins might, or they might not. It's not like they don't have access to it. It's just that some assassin players just don't build penetration. And warriors typically don't build penetration either. They might splash in 10% from Soul Eater, maybe, and maybe they'll throw in another 20% from Heartseeker if they're if they're playing that way, but not all of them do. A lot of them just stick with the 10% from Soul Eater and call it a day. Not a whole lot of people are building penetration right now in the current meta, so Sentinel's Embrace really stretches out quite an impressive amount. It will surprise you. Now, every once in a blue moon, the enemy team will be unusually squishy, I'll go for bluestone. This is very rare, but it does occasionally happen, okay? I have built this on occasion when the enemy team, actually not when the, yeah, well, I've built this both when the enemy team, primarily I build this when the enemy team is a little tankier than average, actually, because Warrior's Axe, no, actually, no. I guess I interchanged these because I can think about occasions where I've built Bluestone Brooch for both tanky and squishy comps, and I've built Warrior's Axe against both as well. Yeah, I suppose it really comes down to the fact of whether or not you want to be defensive, like I usually do, and I usually go Warrior's Axe, or if you want to go with the damage, go for Bluestone. He does work relatively well with this. Again, especially when you consider how often he can reduce his cooldowns, you can actually trigger this fairly consistently and maintain this fairly consistently, especially with Telu Assault, which gives you the 2 stacks of this right away, basically. So you have that. You know, and I usually build Gladiator's Shield, but it's not usually the first item I build. The first item I build is going to really depend on what I'm doing and where I'm going. Now, again, going back to support, my preferred playstyle for Guan Yu, the first thing I'm usually going to do is either build a defense item that really helps out against the usual, damage source here from the enemy. In a lot of cases, I'm going to often be building Sovereignty. Now, you might be wondering, Professor, do you build Gauntlet of Thebes on Guan Yu? The answer to that is not anymore. I used to. And every once in a blue moon, if my ADC or my mid is unusually aggressive, like which I haven't seen this meta so far, then maybe I'll go for a nice Gauntlet of Thebes. But the problem is because of how much damage Guan Yu tends to inflict on enemy minions and stuff, I tend to accidentally kill a lot of minions or pick up kills as Guan Yu, even as a support, especially in the early game. So for Guan Yu very specifically, I've noticed that it's even more difficult than normal to build these stacks on Gauntlet of Thebes because things tend to drop like flies near Guan Yu. So I haven't built this recently too much. I think I can only remember like 2 games the past year that I've built this on Guan Yu in the support role. I think one of them is a previously recorded episode. And again, I don't really build Mail of Renewal much. I only have this at the Emerald Mail because there is the rare occasion where I'll use Gauntlet of Thebes. It happens occasionally. The only times I think I would recommend building this is if the enemy team is low defense, high in damage. Say they have an assassin support, or maybe they have a hunter solo lane, right? You expect higher than the average amount of damage out of the enemy team. It might be worth it to build Gauntlet of Thebes and cool off in the early game and try to play a bit more passively, because you might need those protections for the higher increased damage intake, but that doesn't happen terribly often. And even then, I still probably would prefer to go with Sovereignty. It comes down to more of how comfortable you are backing off and not accidentally taking things down, which is tough to do with Guan Yu because, again, Telu Assault is reducing their protections, and in the early game, that 30 flat protection drop is disgusting, because you can get that ability to level 5 by the time you're like level 7 or 8, I think, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head. Maybe 9 if you're... Well, in the support role, it would be level 9. But it is a really absurd amount of damage coming out of Telu Assault from level 9. And you tend to just accidentally kill things a lot of the time. So it's just very difficult right now to get Gauntlet of Thebes evolved early enough on Guan Yu. So I would personally recommend, even in a high aggressive enemy comp, or a particularly aggressive ally if you're partying with someone, I would still recommend against Gauntlet of Thebes. I think you'll find you'll have a similar problem I do, where you're just dropping too many minions by yourself, and you just don't get these stacks. At least you don't get them fast enough. So that's just generally where I come from with that. I sometimes use Shield of Regrowth in the late game, just so I can get a speed boost out of my heal. The power increase is nice and all, but it's primarily, for me, about that move speed boost. Fun fact, you can actually, if you heal someone with Shield of Regrowth on, you'll get that speed boost that affects your cavalry charge. So if you're trying to cavalry charge someone from an unusual distance away, heal someone with Shield of Regrowth on, and you actually will move much faster under cavalry charge than you would normally expect. Pop sprint right beforehand, and you're going even faster. It's gross, which is why I actually want to specifically point out here and add this very specifically here. Heavenly, well, they call it Heavenly Wings now. We used to call it Sprint back in the day, but either way, pop this right beforehand, your ult will also move faster by quite a decent bit. Just as a fun fact. Another item I like on this, well, okay, hold on, let me go categorically. So usually I'm going Sovereignty. Every once in a while, the enemy team composition will really favor magic damage, and then I'll build Heart Ward. That doesn't happen terribly often. That's why you don't see Heart Ward or any of its tree on here. It's very rare, but it does occasionally happen. And even then, I'll still often be building Fabulous Hoops first anyways, because I do want to provide my allies with that shield, make the heal mean something. So I very rarely build Heart Ward even in those situations. In fact, the only time I build Heart Ward on Guan Yu is if the enemy has 4 or even 5 magic damage dealers, which again is very rare. Not many teams are that insane. So my default is usually Fey Hoops, but if the enemy team has like a magic ADC and a Guardian, I'll go Fey Blast Hoops. It's a very specific scenario, and I have to basically guess that that's where they're going with it in the first place before I build Fey Blast Hoops as my second item. But a lot of the times I'm going with Sovereignty. If I'm unsure, I often will build Sovereignty anyways. Or if I'm unsure, I'll go into Mystic Mail. Right, Mystic Mail is actually really powerful on Guan Yu because it's doing, obviously, the 20 plus 1 per level that eventually winds up being 40 damage per second. And then, of course, that's mitigated by enemy protections, but you're reducing enemy protections a lot of the time with Taolu Assault, so this actually winds up hurting enemies a little bit more than they expect, and if you get into a protracted fight like you typically do in the late game, you'd be surprised how many people are just unaware of how much damage they're taking from this, especially when Guan Yu busts out Taolu Assault and they're taking a little bit more than they expect. Usually it's by a difference of about maybe 3 to 5 damage per second. And the debuff lasts, I think, 3 seconds? 3 to 5? How long does that debuff last? I can't quite remember off the top of my head. 5 seconds. 5 seconds, yeah. So for the next 5 seconds, they're taking an extra 15, 20 damage. Every time you have Taolu Assault up, which on average is 10 seconds if you've got a moderate amount of cooldown and you're using your abilities properly to reduce their cooldowns, you'd be surprised how consistently you can keep Mystical Mail's damage pretty damn high. But if I'm really nervous and I don't know what's going to be in that lane, I'll bust out a nice early Mystical Mail and do some extra damage. Right? I have an absolute blast with that. I've done that before. Usually I'm restricting Mystical Mail to when I'm playing solo lane Guan Yu. I'll usually build that as primarily my second item. Not my second item, my third item. I'll talk about that in a bit. But when I'm playing support Guan Yu, usually it's Sovereignty. If the enemy team has enough magic damage, I'll go into Fey Blessed Hoops. If I'm really nervous about it, I'll go into Mystic Mail. Doesn't happen that often in this meta. Last year I started with Mystical Mail quite a bit often because team comps were wild last year. But they've cooled off a little bit. There's still the occasional team composition where I'm really unsure and I'll build Mystical Mail anyways. Not very common, but just to keep you in mind, if you're unsure, at the very least, even if you don't need the physical protections against the enemy team, it'll help you with the minions, and it's doing some extra damage for you to the enemy, so that it is ultimately a good benefit. Another interesting point I would like to make is that Emperor's Armor is unusually good on Guan Yu, because if you're defending a tower or a phoenix, you're using Taolu Assault, you're reducing enemy protections, they're taking extra damage from that tower or phoenix, and that's a great thing. And since you can also slow them down with your dash right beforehand, or right afterwards, you can actually get a lot of damage out of your towers and phoenixes with Emperor's Armor. Now that Emperor's Armor gives you 60 physical protections, this is something I will sometimes build, depending on how badly we do at the beginning, my ADC and I. If we take a couple of dives early game I might start building steel mail with the intention of getting sovereignty, but if we die often enough in the early game, I'm just going to switch over to Emperor's Armor. It's going to give me nearly as much physical protections. It's going to really help out, your tower damage. It You can often use this to turn things around really nicely. Because again, just like with Mystical Mail, a lot of people forget that they're losing protections to Taolu Assault. Very few people are actively aware of that. So you can get away with a surprisingly large amount of damage just because they're not paying attention. So just kind of keep that in mind as a backup plan in case things go south abnormally early. This has been happening a bit more in recent times, now that people are really focused on trying to snowball. Even though it's a much slower snowball than it used to be 3-4 years ago, I remember that was a really heavy snowball meta. People are still trying to achieve that in the current meta a lot of the times, so Emperor's Armor is something I have built on occasion recently, as of this year, really. Now that it actually gives you decent protections, it's actually a good item on Guan Yu to use if things go to shit real quick, real early. Okay, just kind of keep that in mind. This is something very recent, like I said, as of this year that I've incorporated into my playstyle with him. I still don't build it terribly often because it's very rare for Guan Yu to do that badly early on. Again, Taolu Assault has a huge impact on the early game. I can't rave about Taolu Assault enough. It's my favorite ability in the game. So it's very rare that I have to do this, but it has happened, okay? So, usually you're pulling something out of this tree. I think the only thing I don't usually build on Guan Yu is Midgardian Mail. It's the only one of these four that I don't usually build on him, but you're usually building something out of here first. Now, again, I play a bit more defensively, so I tend to go Sovereignty. If you are more aggressive, go for Mystical Mail as a support. Do it. If you like that damage increase, you are an aggressive support, go for it, right? But usually I'm going to start here, and then my next item is usually going to be Pridwin. Now, this kind of follows the same rules as I use for Brain Cramp, as I use for Mystical Mail. You're reducing enemy protections, so when that passive shield pops, assuming you've been using Taolu Assault recently, that's going to do a little bit more damage than a lot of people are going to expect, right? Now, I build Pridwin as my third item a lot of the times, because at that point I want the cooldowns. It's primarily for the cooldowns, the combination of protections a lot of the time as well. That's a pretty big deal for me. Guan Yu is primarily ability-based in my view, because again, half his kit reduces the cooldowns of the rest of his stuff. So, adding on to that with 20% cooldown reduction, and a passive that damages enemies that Taolu Assault can increase? Oh, yes, please. Furthermore, if you use Taolu Assault first, you actually get a little bit more protections out of this. Like I said, you can pull 60 to 75 protections out of an enemy total. Actually, no, it's not 60 to 75, it's 60 to 90 protections total from Pridwin. I'm sorry, from the enemy with Taolu Assault. So, since you're getting 90% of your protections from items and abilities, this can be significantly more impactful than, once again, people are really expecting. If you use Taolu Assault, then you pop your ult, get the stun immediately, you're almost guaranteed a devastating Pridwin slap. Hell, you can actually, because the shield lasts for 5 seconds, you just pop the ult, boom, you dash through them, and then you Taolu Assault afterwards additionally. So you Taolu Assault, use your ult, get the stun, dash through them for the slow, Taolu Assault. By the end of all of this, 5 seconds have passed, you're probably really still close to them, because not a whole lot of people are going to try to desperately get away from that combo. The stun is gone, and they're going to be like, oh, Guan Yu has no more hard CC. Blam, Pridwin pops, and you've just done a ton of damage to their face. Try it. It's disturbingly effective. It's more effective than it has any right to be. But for the combination of these reasons, this is usually, in nearly every situation, my go-to third item. Even if I built the Fey Blessed Hoops as my second item, I'm still probably building Pridwin third. Okay? It's just that amazing. It is incredibly impactful. Now, my fourth item, if I built something out of this tree, my fourth item is usually going to be Fey Blessed Hoops. I am looking for the magic protections. I'm looking to kind of offset those. I want, again, the cooldown reduction. That brings me to 30%, which is a beautiful thing. I get some health. I get some MP5, right? If I built Fate Blessed Hoops as my second item, I'm probably building my physical protections here. Now, I don't necessarily build something out of this tree, right? If I build Fate Blessed Hoops as my second item, probably the enemy team comp has a little less physical damage output than one would expect. So usually for my fourth item, if I build Fate Blessed Hoops, my fourth item is going to be Glad Shield. Okay? Usually. If Fate Blessed Hoops was my second item. If Fate Blessed Hoops is my fourth item, then my fifth item is Glad Shield in most compositions. Again, if my second item is something out of this tree, probably the enemy has 3, 4, 5 physical damage output, right? 3 plus enemy gods are physical. So after I build Fate Blessed Hoops, I want to increase my physical protections a little bit more, so I'll go into Gladiator's Shield as my fifth item, right? So now my build as a support Guan Yu is Sentinel's Gift, something out of here, usually Sovereignty. Let's grab Sovereignty really quick here, yeah? Just as my usual. Again, if you prefer the damage output, grab Mystical Mail. Usually going to be that. Pridwin, Fate Blessed Hoops, then I'll... Oops. There we go. Then I'll usually grab Gladiator's Shield at this point. Right? And now I've got 206 physical protections. I've got 162 magic protections. And at this point, I've got a couple of options. Okay? Now, what I build next is going to be very dependent on what my team needs. Okay? Now, a lot of the time, I think my go-to here is very specifically the Caduceus Shield. Gives me a little bit of power, which helps out just basically my dash. Gives me a little bit of health. It gives me both protections, which is really nice. Almost gets my magic protections to 200 by itself. We are going to evolve Sentinel's Gift, so I'm not worried about that. Increases my allies' healing. This is generally my go-to because usually someone else on my team has built some form of lifesteal or has some other form of self-heal. If on the off chance that isn't true, you're literally the only person on the team healing anything anywhere, I will instead go for the Sledge, which is going to, in most team fights, give me almost as many protections. It's going to give me a little bit more power. It's going to give me a little bit more health. It's going to give me some great crowd control reduction, which is the primary reason I actually will build this over Caduceus Shield. And again, that it'll provide you with like 24, it is specifically 24 protections in most team fights. That fades as the team fight continues, but by that point you probably don't need that many protections anyways if there's only 2 enemies left, right? So if for some unholy reason you are somehow the only person healing, which is very rare indeed because most hunters are building lifesteal these days, I'll build the Sledge. Okay? Now, there are rare differences here. There are moments where I will build something a little different. Now, if the enemy team composition... If I build Fate Blessed Hoops as my second item, and I need more magic protections, I will typically go into Runic Shield. Gives you 50 magic protections, gives you a little bit of health, produces enemy magic power, gives you a little bit of physical power. It's a really nice item. Again, if the enemy team composition is fairly magic heavy, I'll just run Runic Shield instead. If the enemy team comp is abnormally tanky, I will instead run Void Shield. So that way I'm reducing the enemy's physical protections even more, which is going to help my allies as well as myself. And a fun fact, because Taolu Assault is a flat protection reduction, the 15% physical protection reduction of Void Shield triggers first, so their physical protections are first being reduced by 15%, and then Taolu Assault is pulling the rest of that away, which is really bad for the enemy squishy targets. But again, this is usually what I'll bust out if the enemy team composition is abnormally tanky. And these are usually my go-tos. If for some bizarre reason the enemy team is absurdly fast or I just need to chase, it happens. I will, like I said, I'll throw in Shield of Regrowth. I don't build Shield of Regrowth anymore really that often. Every once in a blue moon I will. Typically in team compositions that have a absurd dominance of assassins. There was one match I played right at the beginning of the year that stands out to me because it had like 3 assassins on the enemy team. I built Shield of Regrowth to keep up with them. That's about the only time I think that I can remember this year building Shield of Regrowth. I really don't build this that much anymore because there are other items I would prefer to build, in all honesty. I definitely haven't built it since Fabulous Hoops came out because I just love this. But it is something you can use if the enemy team is faster than you want them to be, or you're just trying to, generally catch up to people and get stuff done. But a lot of the time, I am going for Caduceus Shield, and then we go into the lovely Sentinel's Embrace to really kickstart our protections even higher. Okay? That's how I usually build, and the variations of what I usually build for a support Guan Yu. Things go a decent bit differently. Oops, I did not want to actually wipe that out completely. Thank you. That was a goof on my part. Things go quite a bit differently if I'm playing solo lane Guan Yu. Now, like I said, I prefer Warrior's Axe. It's a personal preference. If you want more damage, obviously you would go Bluestone Pendant, and sometimes I do. The first item I'm usually building is Glad Shield, if I'm really sure the enemy is going to be physical. I'm not always. If I'm unsure, just like with support, I'll go with Mystical Mail. Okay? When in doubt, Mystical Mail. You can't go wrong with it, honestly. Not with Guan Yu. So usually it's Glad Shield, sometimes it's Mystical Mail if I'm unsure. If I'm pretty confident the enemy is going to be magic, obviously I'll go Fade-Blessed Hoops. I'm aware of the fact that building Fade-Blessed Hoops as my second item against a magic enemy is not really going to help me in terms of the passive, but that is 10% cooldown. Even more importantly, it's 40 MP5. So if my enemy happens to be magic, or I'm really confident my enemy is going to be magic, then building Fade-Blessed Hoops isn't about the passive yet. The passive will kick in from the mid to late game. I'm looking at that magic protection, I'm looking at the increase in health, I'm looking at the MP5, I'm looking at that cooldown reduction. The base stats on this are incredible against any magic enemy. So if I'm really confident my laning opponent is going to be magic, I'll go for this, because then I also basically don't need to worry about whether or not I have my mana buff anymore at that point. Between Warrior's Axe and Fade-Blessed Hoops, mana isn't a huge deal at that point, right? Again, I typically operate with 2 abilities for like the first 11 levels or something like that. So it's not really a huge deal either way. Now, let's go with what I usually get, which is usually going to be good old Glad Shield. Then my next item is going to usually be Mystical Mail at this point, right? Then I'll build Pridwin a lot of the times. Now again, Mystical Mail is because most of my laning opponents are physical, you're getting extra damage in here. This is very specifically magic damage, so most of your laning opponents aren't going to be building any magic protections until their 4th item, usually. Some people do build magic protections as their 3rd item, and they might do so if they see Mystical Mail. But because a lot of people are so used to seeing Sovereignty, that most people... There are some people who will suspect the possibility of Mystical Mail. There are some people who have that kind of in the back of their mind. But most people are going to assume Sovereignty right now, because Sovereignty is a very popular item in the solo lane right now. So this actually is more likely to, slide by relatively unnoticed. Definitely less noticeable than even a year ago. But I'll typically grab this as my 3rd item. Extra damage that they're not usually building against. Reduce their magic protections even further, because look at what Guan Yu, let's say I'm level 12. Let's be generous here. I'm level 12, right? I'm facing a physical laning opponent. The enemy is also obviously facing a physical opponent because you're Guan Yu. They have a default 90-ish magic protections that varies depending on the warrior specifically. But they're kicking around with 90-ish or so magic protections. If they have bluestone, it's going to be kicking around 80. Take away 30 of that, now they're at 50. They're taking like 3/4 of that mystical mail damage. At this point, level 12, that's 32. They're taking 3/4 of that. That's about like 21-ish, 20, 21 each second. Yeah, that's a lot of damage over the span of any fight. You're wiping out minion waves really damn quick with this. It's just really. Mystical Mail is fairly popular in lane, and a lot of the times I don't like to build Mystical Mail in the solo lane because it gives up control. And this is something I do have to warn you about if you build Mystical Mail. What is this problem here? If you build Mystical Mail in solo lane, you're going to find that there is an interesting issue with losing control of when you're pulling minion aggro. But for Guan Yu, by level 12 in this particular example, I've just gotten 1 point in conviction, so I have some nice sustain there. I can heal my own minions. I can stun enemy minions with Taolu's Assault. I'm dealing damage to them with Mystical Mail and reducing their protections, so they're taking even more damage from Mystical Mail. Have a nice day. And at the end of the day, Guan Yu is one of those warriors where I'm really unconcerned about minion poke, because I'm stealing the enemy's physical protections away as well. So I'm basically using their protections to help cushion me against their minions a lot of the time. So Guan Yu just doesn't care about that loss of sort of control over when he's pulling aggro. He just doesn't care a lot of the times. The only time you are going to care is if you're losing a fight and you need to get out, and that's when you're going to care. But that's, again, Guan Yu is so powerful in the early game that as long as you're not camped by the enemy jungler, you're probably going to come out of that pretty well. Okay? He's just really powerful in the early game, and if you just got to snowball that into the late game. And that's, another one of the points of Mystical Mail. And then I grab Pridwin for the cooldowns, and then I'll grab Fablast Hoops at that point usually. And then finally, what I finish up with as a solo lane is quite a bit different from what I do with a support. Now, obviously, as a solo lane, I'm more inclined to build Mystical Mail. I don't always build Mystical Mail as a support Guan Yu, but as you can see, I usually build it as a solo lane. I don't even usually build it as a support. I occasionally build it on support Guan. But solo Guan loves Mystical Mail, and I build it very consistently on him against most comps. Again, 3 physical, 2 magic. But my last item, that's a question. Now, I've got a couple of options here. If the enemy heals a lot, I'll grab Brawler's Beatstick out of this. Right? Get some healing, anti-healing. If the enemy does not heal, then, but they're really, the enemy team comp is tanky, I'll again bust out possibly Void Shield, another thing I've busted out quite frequently. I might bust out Heartseeker if they're unusually tanky and I have a magic heavy comp. Like maybe I have 3 mages on my team. Void Shield is only going to help myself and the only other physical on the team, whoever that happens to be. So I wouldn't want Void Shield there, I'll just bust out Heartseeker at that point, right? Just for that percentage of health damage. Primarily when I'm solo, that is what I'm usually pulling from. It's usually going to be Brawler's Beatstick for anti-heal, a lot of the times it's Void Shield, a lot of the times it's Heartseeker. If the enemy team doesn't really have that much tankiness, I'll throw in Hydra's Lament and do some surprisingly large amounts of damage with that. Because you can activate that with all of your abilities, you have really low cooldowns anyways. You can absolutely do some devastating things with that. Or maybe I build the Crusher on him for squishy comps. Another possibility. Maybe I go for, I'm more likely to build Shield of Regrowth on solo Guan because I actually want to, I'm more likely to want to chase down enemies as a solo laner because I'm not necessarily trying to save my allies' lives, I'm trying to just keep enemies off and everything, so Shield of Regrowth can be very helpful for that, sometimes. But that is generally where I go with Guan Yu. Now, I just want to put out a really quick note here before I kind of end this episode, because this is a majority of how I build Guan Yu. There are, occasional exceptions, but I really wanted to quickly talk about one item that I used to build all the time before Fablast Hoops happened. What I used to do for my magic protections, I used to use Bulwark of Hope. And I'm mentioning this because Bulwark of Hope is still a really powerful item on Guan Yu. That health shield is really substantial when Taolu Assault is artificially increasing your protections for a majority of a team fight. and you can really stretch that health shield out a considerable amount. So if you don't like Feyblast Hoops because it's just not your style, but you still want the magic protections, try Bulwark of Hope. It is surprisingly extremely useful on Guan Yu in a lot of situations, because instead of dying like a lot of people would expect you to, you suddenly have this grotesquely huge health shield, and it's really hard to bring that health shield down because, yes, I'm pulling away 60 to 90 protections away from my enemies with Talu Assault, right? But this is what I used to build very consistently instead of Feyblast Hoops. Now I build Feyblast Hoops a lot of the time instead. I'll sometimes still bust this out on occasion if the enemy team composition is abnormally aggressive. There are very high damage comps. Sometimes I'll still bust this out instead. It's not terribly often, but I'll still occasionally do so. But that's generally how I approach building Guan Yu. The only times I don't build one of these is if the enemy team has a lot of self-heal. I'll grab Tainted Steel. And if the enemy team composition is really aggressively magical, I'll build Warding Sigil. But again, that's very, very rare, and I still, a lot of the times, still prefer Sentinel's Gift or Warrior's Axe. That's mostly what I'll change to in the solo lane, depending on what the enemy is in that lane. But with that being said, that is how I approach building Guan Yu. Again, I primarily play him in the solo, or ideally in the support role, and we will be talking about him in the support role in the next episode, so just keep that in mind when we can talk about the grotesque early aggression of Guan Yu and how you can really take advantage of that as a Guan Yu support. So with that being said, thank you all very much for joining me. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.